She controlled billions but couldn't buy a $4 latte. Amy Burton stood paralyzed at the coffee shop counter, her platinum corporate card rejected, a room full of Monday morning strangers watching the Iron Queen of venture capital crumble over pocket change. Then a hand appeared beside her, calloused and certain, belonging to a maintenance contractor she'd walked past 1,000 times without seeing, and placed a wrinkled $10 bill on the counter. "Allow me," he said, his voice like gravel and honey. Their eyes locked. And in that impossible moment, neither of them realized that a declined card would shatter an empire of loneliness, that an invisible man's kindness would save a woman who'd forgotten how to be human, and that the contractor in work boots was hiding the kind of tactical genius that could win wars. If you want to witness how one act of mercy turned into the battle neither of them expected, one that would force a billionaire to choose between power and love, and a single father to reclaim the brilliance he'd buried, stay until the very end. The spring morning stabbed through Chicago's financial district, turning steel and glass into monuments of ambition and exhaust. Amy Burton moved through the lobby of her own building like a woman at war with time itself. Her heels struck the marble in a staccato rhythm that echoed like gunfire, controlled, relentless, the soundtrack of a life with no room for weakness. She was 36 years old, the founder and CEO of Burton Ventures, and she hadn't slept more than 5 hours a night in 4 years. Not because her body didn't need rest. Her net worth had crossed the $2 billion mark last quarter, enough to buy rest for a dozen lifetimes. But because rest was surrender. The moment she closed her eyes too long, the moment she let someone see past the impeccable tailoring and the razor-sharp replies, they would wonder if Amy Burton was as invincible as the headlines claimed. The coffee shop on the ground floor of her building was her Monday ritual. Not because the coffee was exceptional, her executive assistant kept a Lomarzocco espresso machine in her private office that cost more than a luxury sedan, but because this was where normal humans congregated. For 7 minutes every Monday morning, Amy Burton could cosplay as ordinary. Just another professional in line. Just another woman juggling calls and calendar alerts. Just another soul who needed caffeine to survive the week. The line was 12 deep today, coiling past the pastry case toward the entrance. Amy checked her watch, a Patek Philippe her board had gifted her when she closed the Meridian deal, and calculated the damage. 9 minutes, possibly 10. Acceptable. The investor's breakfast didn't start until 8:30, and her assistant was already upstairs preparing the war room. She was mentally rehearsing her opening pitch when she reached the counter. The barista was barely out of college, all nervous energy and a name tag that read, Jenna. Grande Americano, Amy said, her wallet already open. For shots, no water. That'll be $4.50. Amy pulled out her corporate black card, the centurion that had purchased penthouses and IPO stakes and enough server farms to power a small nation, and placed it on the counter with the unconscious confidence of someone who had never once worried about a transaction failing. Jenna swiped the card. Nothing. She swiped it again, her smile faltering as she stared at the screen. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. It's being declined." Amy felt the word before her brain processed it. Declined. The card with a limit that could buy this entire coffee shop chain was being rejected in front of the Monday morning audience. "That's impossible," Amy said, her voice arctic. "Try it again." Jenna tried again. The machine responded with a hostile beep. Behind her, someone exhaled dramatically. Someone else muttered about people wasting everyone's time. Amy's neck flushed hot, not from shame, she told herself, but from fury. This was a system error. A glitch. Someone in accounting would be unemployed by noon. "Do you have another card?" Jenna asked, and the question carried something worse than judgment. Sympathy. Amy tore through her wallet with hands that had suddenly forgotten how to stay still. She cycled past the black card to the Platinum Visa, the Chase Reserve she kept for international acquisitions, the backup card tied to her personal account that she hadn't touched in 2 years. Every single one was linked to Burton Ventures' financial infrastructure. "Ma'am, there are people waiting," a voice called from the back. Amy's spine went rigid. She turned, a cutting response already forming on her tongue, when a hand reached past her shoulder. The hand was weathered, scarred across the knuckles, with calluses that spoke of real work. It belonged to a man in a contractor's uniform, navy work shirt with a name patch, canvas pants, steel-toed boots dusted with drywall, and it held a crumpled $10 bill that looked like it had survived a washing machine. "Allow me," the man said. Amy looked up. He was tall, broad-shouldered, despite the modest uniform, with dark blonde hair cut military short and eyes the color of storm clouds over Lake Michigan. There was something in his face, a calm that didn't belong in this frantic city, a steadiness that made the entire room's anxiety seem foolish. He handed the bill to Jenna, nodded once to Amy, and walked away before she could speak. The scent of cedar and old leather lingered where he'd stood. Amy took her coffee with hands that wouldn't stop trembling and watched the contractor disappear into the service elevator, his name patch just visible before the doors closed. C. Burke. Amy Burton didn't believe in fate, but she believed in data. By noon, she had his full name, social security number, employment history, and credit score sitting on her desk in a manila folder marked, personal research. Charles Marcus Burke, age 41, employed by Midwest Facility Services for 6 years, assigned to the Burton Tower maintenance rotation. No criminal record. No debt. No social media presence whatsoever, which in itself was suspicious in an age where everyone performed their lives online. She expected to find desperation, a man drowning in bills who'd spent his last $10 on a stranger's pity project. Instead, she found a ghost. Someone who deliberately erased himself from the world. "Run a deeper background check," Amy told her head of security, Marcus Chen. "Military service, employment gaps, everything." Marcus returned 3 hours later looking pale. "Ma'am, his file is mostly redacted. What I could access shows he was Navy, then transferred to some kind of joint task force. After that, it's all black boxes and classified stamps. He left the service 8 years ago with an honorable discharge and full benefits. Then nothing. Just, maintenance work." Amy leaned back in her chair, her mind racing through possibilities. Special operations. Black ops. Someone with that kind of clearance didn't just walk away to fix air conditioning units. They ran from something or they were hiding someone. She stood, grabbing her coat. "What's his home address?" Marcus hesitated. "Ms. Burton, if he's former intelligence, approaching him directly could." "Could what?" Amy's voice could have cut steel. "I don't care what alphabet agency he used to work for. He paid for my coffee with money he probably couldn't afford to spare, and I don't leave debts unpaid." The address led her to a modest neighborhood on the south side, worlds away from her penthouse overlooking the lake. Charles Burke lived in a small craftsman bungalow with a porch swing and a yard full of dandelions. A child's bicycle lay abandoned in the grass, pink streamers trailing from the handlebars. Amy sat in her town car for 10 minutes, watching the house, questioning her own sanity. She'd built an empire by trusting numbers, not impulses. Yet here she was, tracking down a maintenance worker like some obsessed character in a cheap thriller. She was about to tell her driver to leave when the front door opened. Charles Burke stepped out, still in his work uniform, carrying a little girl on his shoulders. The child, maybe 7 or 8, wore a princess dress over jeans and was laughing at something her father said. He set her down gently, knelt to tie her shoe, and the tenderness in that simple gesture hit Amy like a physical blow. She hadn't realized she'd stepped out of the car until Charles looked up and saw her standing on his sidewalk. His expression shifted from surprise to something harder, more guarded. He stood slowly, positioning himself between Amy and his daughter. "Ms. Burton." His voice was even, but there was steel underneath. "This is unexpected. I came to repay you, Amy said, holding up an envelope. For the coffee. It was $4.50. You brought a car and a security detail for $4.50. The little girl peeked around her father's leg, staring at Amy with huge brown eyes. Daddy, who's the fancy lady? Someone from work, sweetheart. Charles didn't take his eyes off Amy. Why don't you go inside and work on your drawing? I'll be there in a minute. The child hesitated, then skipped into the house, her princess dress twirling. Charles waited until the door closed. How did you find me? I have resources. Amy stepped closer. I also have questions. I'm sure you do. But I'm not interested in answering them. He moved toward his door. Keep your money, Ms. Burton. I don't need it, and I don't need whatever this is. You were military intelligence, Amy said, and Charles froze. Joint Special Operations Command, if my sources are correct. You had clearance levels that most generals don't see. Now you're fixing toilets in my building. Why? Charles turned slowly, and for the first time, Amy saw something dangerous in his storm cloud eyes. Because some battles aren't worth winning. Some wars cost too much. And some men get smart enough to walk away before they lose the only thing that matters. He gestured toward the house where his daughter had disappeared. I have everything I need, Ms. Burton. Whatever you're looking for, you won't find it here. He went inside, and the door clicked shut with a finality that felt like dismissal. Amy stood on the sidewalk, the envelope still in her hand, her carefully prepared speech evaporating. For the first time in a decade, someone had looked at her fortune, her power, her entire empire, and chosen to walk away. She was halfway back to her car when she noticed it, through the living room window, visible for just a moment before the curtains shifted. Spread across the coffee table beneath the little girl's crayon drawings were papers covered in complex diagrams. Strategic maps. Logistical flowcharts. The kind of tactical planning that would make a Pentagon general weep with envy. Charles Burke wasn't just hiding from his past. He was hiding who he was. And Amy Burton had just discovered something far more valuable than she'd come looking for. Amy Burton prided herself on respecting boundaries, but she'd never let them stop her from getting what she wanted. She returned the next evening with a different approach. No town car. No security detail. Just her, a bottle of decent wine, and the envelope containing not $450 but $5,000 in cash. She knocked 3 times before Charles opened the door, still in his work clothes, a dish towel slung over his shoulder. The smell of something burning wafted out. You're persistent, he said. It's kept me alive in a competitive industry. Amy held up the wine. I'm not here as your boss. I'm here as someone who owes you a debt. I told you. And I'm not good at leaving things unfinished. She met his eyes. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. If you still want me to leave after that, I'll disappear and never bother you again. Charles studied her for a long moment, then sighed and stepped aside. 5 minutes. The house was smaller inside than it looked, but it was lived in a way Amy's penthouse had never been. Children's drawings covered the refrigerator. Books overflowed from shelves. A half-finished puzzle sprawled across the dining table. In the corner, the little girl, still in her princess dress, was coloring intently, her tongue poking out in concentration. Emma, say hello to Ms. Burton, Charles said. Emma looked up, her eyes lighting up. Are you a queen? You dress like a queen. Amy felt something crack in her chest. No, sweetheart. Just a businesswoman. That's basically a queen, Emma announced with the certainty of a child, then returned to her coloring. Charles led Amy to the kitchen, where a pot of spaghetti sauce was indeed burning on the stove. He rescued it with practiced efficiency, killed the heat, and leaned against the counter. You have 4 minutes left. Amy set the envelope on the counter. I know you don't need the money. But I need you to take it anyway, because I don't like feeling indebted. Then consider us even. Charles didn't touch the envelope. I also know what you were, Amy continued, lowering her voice. And I know you're wasting your talent changing light bulbs and unclogging drains. Charles's jaw tightened. I'm raising my daughter. That's not a waste. I didn't say it was. Amy glanced toward the living room where Emma was humming to herself. But I saw the papers on your coffee table last night. Strategic analysis. Supply chain optimization. Risk assessment matrices that would make my CFO quit in shame. You're not just a maintenance worker, Charles. You're still running operations in your head. What I do in my own home is none of your concern. It is when you're the solution to a problem I can't solve. Amy pulled out her phone, showed him a news article. Julian Thorne. He runs Thorne Capital, the second largest venture firm in the Midwest. For the past 6 months, he's been systematically targeting my portfolio companies, poaching my partners, and spreading rumors that Burton Ventures is on the verge of collapse. Last week, he convinced 3 of my major investors to pull their funding. I'm hemorrhaging credibility, and I can't figure out his pattern. Charles glanced at the screen, and Amy saw it, a flicker of interest, quickly suppressed. Hire a consultant. I have 12 consultants. They're all useless. Amy pocketed her phone. I need someone who thinks like a strategist, not a spreadsheet. Someone who can see 10 moves ahead. Someone who... Daddy. Emma's voice called from the living room. Can you help me with the castle? Charles pushed off the counter. Your 5 minutes are up, Ms. Burton. Amy followed him into the living room, where Emma had spread out her crayons and a complicated drawing of what appeared to be a fortress under siege. As Charles knelt beside his daughter, Amy's eyes fell on the papers underneath, and her breath caught. They weren't just tactical diagrams. They were solutions. Charles had mapped out an entire counter-strategy to Julian Thorne's attacks, complete with financial projections, risk matrices, and contingency plans. The top page was dated 2 days ago. He'd been working on it since the coffee shop incident. Charles saw where she was looking and quickly gathered the papers. Emma, how about we show Ms. Burton your garden? But Amy had already seen enough. The analysis was brilliant, the kind of operational genius that military strategists spent careers developing. Charles had identified patterns in Julian's attacks that her own team had missed, predicted his next 3 moves, and outlined counter-strategies for each scenario. It was the work of someone who'd spent years in hostile environments, making life-or-death decisions based on incomplete information. Why? Amy asked quietly. Why did you analyze this if you don't care? Charles set the papers down, his shoulders sagging slightly. Because I can't help it. I see patterns everywhere. Supply chains, market movements, people's behavior. It's how my brain works. I've tried to turn it off, but... He looked at Emma, who was showing Amy a crayon drawing of a flower. But it doesn't matter what I can see if acting on it means risking her stability. She's lost enough. I won't let my old life take me away from her again. What if it didn't have to? Amy crouched down to Emma's level. What if your dad could help people and still be home for dinner every night? Emma looked up at her father. Daddy, can you help the Queen? Charles closed his eyes, and Amy saw the war playing out behind them. The part of him that had walked away from power versus the part that couldn't stop solving problems. The father versus the strategist. The man who'd chosen peace versus the warrior who couldn't ignore a battle. When he opened his eyes, they were harder. If I did this, and I'm not saying I will, it would be on my terms. I work from home. I set my hours. And the moment this affects my daughter, I'm done. Amy stood, extending her hand. Deal. Charles didn't take it. You haven't heard my price. Name it. Julian Thorne isn't just attacking your company, Ms. Burton. He's attacking you personally because you rejected his acquisition offer 3 years ago. Men like him don't forgive that kind of humiliation. If I help you win this war, he'll come after me too. After Emma. He finally took Amy's hand, his grip firm and certain. So my price is this: you guarantee my daughter's safety. Private security, new identity if necessary, whatever it takes. Because once I step into your world, I'm bringing a target to my family's door. Amy felt the weight of what he was asking. I'll protect her with everything I have. Then we have a deal. Charles released her hand. But I want something else, too. When this is over and Thorne is finished, you let me walk away. No strings, no obligations. I get to come back to this house and this life, and you forget I exist. Amy nodded, even though something in her chest twisted at the thought of Charles Burke disappearing back into invisibility. Agreed. As she left, Emma waved goodbye from the porch, and Charles stood behind his daughter with his hands on her shoulders. He looked like a man who just agreed to walk back into a war he'd spent years escaping. And Amy felt the uncomfortable realization that she'd just dragged someone good into her world of calculated cruelty. But as she drove away, she couldn't stop thinking about those papers on his coffee table. Charles Burke hadn't just analyzed Julian Thorne's strategy. He'd already been planning how to protect Amy Burton before she'd even asked. And that meant something she didn't quite know how to name. Charles Burke stood in Amy's office 72 floors above Chicago, staring at the contract on her desk like it might detonate. Chief Strategy Officer, he read aloud. 6-month contract. Salary of $800,000 plus equity. He looked up at Amy, who sat behind her glass desk like a general planning an invasion. You're insane. I'm desperate, Amy corrected. There's a difference. Not from where I'm standing. Charles tossed the contract back onto the desk. I told you I'd consult from home. This is a full executive position. This is you trying to put me on a leash. This is me making sure Julian Thorne takes you seriously. Amy stood, moving to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. If you're just a consultant, he'll dismiss you. But if you're an officer of Burton Ventures, with your name on the door and equity in the company, you become a legitimate threat. And men like Julian don't ignore threats. Men like Julian eliminate them, Charles said quietly. You're painting a target on my back. I'm giving you armor. Amy turned to face him. Think strategically, Charles. Right now, you're nobody. A maintenance worker who got lucky. But as my chief strategy officer, you have legitimacy. Resources. Legal protection. If Thorne comes after you, he has to go through corporate attorneys and SEC regulations. It's harder to destroy someone who has institutional power. Charles walked to the window, his jaw working. From this height, the city looked like a game board. Buildings were pieces. Streets were supply lines. People were assets to be deployed. It was exactly the kind of thinking that had made him exceptional at his old job and exactly what he'd been trying to escape. I have a daughter, he said. I know. She's 7 years old. Her mother died when she was 3. I'm all she has. He turned to Amy, and his storm cloud eyes were fierce. Every decision I make, every risk I take, I measure against her. And this risk? This doesn't pass that test. Amy's expression softened, just slightly. What's her name? You've never told me. Emma. Charles's voice gentled. Emma Burke. She wants to be a veterinarian. She's afraid of the dark but won't admit it. She thinks I don't know she sneaks cookies before dinner. And she's the reason I left JSOC, the reason I moved to Chicago, the reason I became invisible. Because being her father is the only mission that matters. Then do it for her. Amy pulled up something on her tablet, turned it to face Charles. This is Julian Thorne's attack pattern from the past 6 months. He doesn't just destroy companies, he destroys the people who run them. Last year, he targeted Meridian Tech. By the time he was done, the CEO lost everything, her company, her reputation, her pension. She's working retail now. And her 2 kids. Amy's voice hardened. They had to drop out of college because the family was bankrupted. Charles felt ice slide down his spine. Thorne wins by making examples, Amy continued. And I'm his next target. When he finishes with Burton Ventures, I'll lose everything I've built. But I'm not his only victim. I have 600 employees. Families depending on this company. And if we go down, Julian will buy our assets for pennies and liquidate them for parts. 600 people will lose their jobs right before the holidays. She stepped closer. You want to protect Emma? Then help me protect everyone else's children too. Because if Thorne wins, this doesn't end with me. It ends with families like yours losing everything. Charles closed his eyes. She was good, he'd give her that. Amy Burton knew exactly which pressure points to strike. Appeal to his protective instincts. Make it about innocence. Turn strategy into morality. There's something else you should know, Amy said quietly. Julian's been buying property in your neighborhood. 3 houses on your block in the past 2 months, all purchased through shell companies. He's already circling you, Charles. Even if you walk away from this deal, he's noticed you. Charles's eyes snapped open. What? I had my security team run surveillance. Thorne knows who you are. Or at least, he knows you're someone I've been meeting with. Amy pulled up property records. He's doing what he always does, mapping the territory, identifying pressure points. Your house, Emma's school, the park where you take her on weekends. He's already building a file on you. The room tilted. Charles gripped the edge of Amy's desk, his tactical mind racing through scenarios. Thorne had identified him as a threat based on nothing more than association with Amy. Which meant Emma was already in the crossfire, whether Charles took this position or not. You should have led with that, Charles said, his voice rough. I was trying to convince you with the right reasons first. Amy pulled the contract closer. But yes, the truth is this, you're already in the game, whether you want to be or not. The only question is whether you're playing offense or defense. Charles picked up the contract, reading it more carefully. What happens after 6 months? You walk away. Just like we agreed. And Emma's security? Full-time protection. Ex-Secret Service. I've already hired the team. They start tomorrow whether you sign this or not. Charles looked at Amy, really looked at her. The Iron Queen who'd built an empire on ruthless calculation. But underneath that armor, he saw something else. She was terrified. Not of losing her company, but of being responsible for the collateral damage. She was trying to protect people the only way she knew how, by going to war. If I do this, Charles said slowly, I need to know you're ready for what comes next. Julian Thorne isn't going to play fair. He's going to dig into my past, find every classified operation I ever ran, and try to twist it into something ugly. He's going to leak it to the press, to your board, to anyone who'll listen. Are you prepared for that? Are you? Amy shot back. I've made peace with my past. But have you made peace with allying yourself with someone who did things that can't be explained in a boardroom? Because once my file goes public, and it will, you're going to face questions you can't answer. Amy didn't hesitate. Then we'll face them together. Charles stared at the contract for a long moment, thinking of Emma's laugh, her princess dress, her crayon drawings. He thought of the families Amy had mentioned, the children who'd lose their homes if Burton Ventures fell. He thought of Julian Thorne buying houses on his street, mapping his daughter's world like a hunting ground. He signed the contract with a pen that probably cost more than his monthly rent. 6 months, he said. And then I disappear. 6 months, Amy agreed. Welcome to the war, Mr. Burke. As Charles left her office, he passed a mirror in the hallway and barely recognized the man staring back. He'd spent 8 years trying to become someone else, someone normal, someone safe. But the strategist who'd planned Black Ops missions in hostile territories was still there, just beneath the surface. And Amy Burton had just called him back into service. He pulled out his phone and texted Emma's babysitter, "Extra security starts tomorrow. If anyone asks, tell them it's a precaution. Don't scare Emma." Then he texted Amy, "I need everything you have on Thorne. Financial records, personal history, known associates. Everything. And one more thing." Her reply came instantly, "Name it. I want to know why this is personal for him. Men don't wage war like this over a rejected acquisition. What did you do to Julian Thorne that made him want to destroy you?" Amy's response took longer this time, "Dinner tomorrow night. I'll tell you the whole story. But Charles? You might regret asking." Charles pocketed his phone and headed for the elevator, his mind already running through tactical scenarios. He'd agreed to 6 months of war. But something told him 6 months wouldn't be enough to finish what was about to begin. And somewhere across the city, in an office that overlooked the same skyline from a different angle, Julian Thorne received a notification that Charles Burke had just become an executive at Burton Ventures. He smiled and picked up his phone. "Get me everything on Charles Burke," he told his assistant. "And I mean everything. This just got interesting." Charles Burke's first day as Chief Strategy Officer began with a cardboard box of his belongings and a conference room full of people who wanted him to fail. Amy's executive team sat around the mahogany table like a tribunal of expensive suits and hostile stares. Her CFO, Michael Chen, had Harvard degrees framed behind his head. Her COO, Patricia Whitmore, wore a Chanel blazer that cost more than Charles's truck. Her general counsel, David Ramos, looked like he practiced his contempt in the mirror every morning. Charles set his box down, containing a photo of Emma, a thermos of coffee, and a worn copy of The Art of War, and took the empty seat at Amy's right hand. "Everyone, meet Charles Burke," Amy said crisply. "Our new Chief Strategy Officer. He'll be leading our defense against Julian Thorne's market manipulation." Silence. Then Patricia laughed, a sharp, cutting sound. "You're joking." "Do I look like I'm joking?" Amy's voice could have frozen nitrogen. "Ms. Burton, with all respect," Michael said carefully, "we weren't consulted on this hire. We don't know anything about Mr. Burke's qualifications, his background, his education." Patricia interrupted, her eyes raking over Charles's off-the-rack sports coat. "Let me guess. Community college. Online MBA. Navy," Charles said quietly. "Then specialized training. No formal business degree." The room erupted. David Ramos stood up. "This is absurd. We're facing an existential threat from one of the most sophisticated investors in the country, and you've hired a janitor." "I was maintenance," Charles corrected. "There's a difference. Maintenance worker," David continued, "to run our strategy. Amy, this is career suicide. The board will never." "The board doesn't make personnel decisions for my executive team," Amy said coldly. "I do. And I've made mine." Michael leaned forward, his voice more diplomatic. "Ms. Burton, we understand you want fresh perspectives, but Mr. Burke doesn't understand our industry. He doesn't have the background to." "To what?" Charles interrupted. To see that Julian Thorne used 5 shell companies to short your stock while simultaneously spreading rumors to your investors. To notice that he's been systematically targeting your portfolio companies in exactly the order that would cause maximum cascade failure. To predict that his next move will be against your cloud infrastructure division because it's your highest revenue generator and your most vulnerable asset. He pulled out a tablet from his box, slid it across the table. To map out his entire attack pattern for the next 8 weeks and provide counter-strategies for each scenario. The executive stared at the screen. Michael's face went pale. Patricia stopped smiling. How did you? David breathed. Pattern recognition, Charles said. It's what I do. Thorne runs his acquisitions like military operations: isolate the target, cut supply lines, demoralize the troops, strike the command center. He's textbook. Predictable, if you know what to look for. You've been on the job for 3 minutes, Patricia said, but there was less certainty in her voice now. You can't possibly. I've been studying this for 2 weeks. Charles met her eyes. Since the day Amy Burton told me about the problem. I don't need an MBA to see what's coming. I just need to pay attention. Michael scrolled through the tablet, his frown deepening. This analysis is, actually very good. But understanding the problem isn't the same as solving it. Do you have any idea how to fight someone with Thorne's resources? Yes, Charles said simply. You don't fight his resources. You fight his ego. Amy was watching him with something like pride, but Charles could feel the tension in the room. These people had worked their entire careers to sit at this table. And he'd been handed a chair based on nothing but Amy's faith in him. Let me be clear, Charles said, standing. I know what you all think of me. You think I'm a charity case. A pet project. Amy's latest bad decision. And maybe you're right. But here's what I know, Julian Thorne has spent 6 months dismantling this company because your leader wounded his ego. And if we don't stop him in the next 90 days, Burton Ventures will be nothing but a cautionary tale in business school textbooks. He pointed to the tablet. That document outlines 3 strategies. Strategy 1 assumes we fight Thorne head-on with legal challenges and PR campaigns. We'll lose, because he has deeper pockets and better lawyers. Strategy 2 assumes we try to outmaneuver him financially by securing new investors. We'll lose, because he's already poisoned that well. Strategy 3. Charles paused. Strategy 3 assumes we make this personal. We figure out what Julian Thorne values more than victory, and we threaten it. We turn his weapon against him. That's extortion, David said flatly. That's war, Charles corrected. And you don't win wars by following the rules. You win by understanding what your enemy can't afford to lose. Patricia shook her head. This is insane. Amy, you can't seriously be considering. I'm not considering it. I've already approved it. Amy stood, moving to stand beside Charles. Mr. Burke has identified a pattern my own team missed. He's proposed solutions my consultants never thought of. And most importantly, he's already predicted Thorne's next 3 moves. If he's right about even one of them, he'll have proven himself. If he's wrong. She looked at Charles. Then he's fired, and we go back to losing slowly instead of losing quickly. Charles felt the weight of that statement. He had one chance. One opportunity to prove that a maintenance worker from the South Side could outthink the Harvard MBAs and the Yale attorneys and the Princeton strategists who'd spent decades climbing this ladder. When's your next board meeting? Charles asked. Friday, Amy said. 3 days. Good. That gives me time to prepare. Charles picked up his box. Where's my office? Michael spoke up. Actually, we haven't arranged office space yet. The executive floor is full, N. He'll take the office next to mine, Amy interrupted. The one I've been using for storage. Patricia's eyes widened. That office has a private elevator and a view of the lake. That's prime real estate. Then it's perfect for my chief strategy officer. Amy's tone left no room for argument. Clear it out by noon. Mr. Burke needs to get to work. As the meeting adjourned, Charles felt the weight of their stares. These people weren't allies. They were obstacles waiting for him to fail so they could prove their own superiority. He was an outsider, an interloper, a blue-collar nobody who'd been handed power he hadn't earned. Michael caught up with him in the hallway. A word of advice, Burke. Don't get comfortable. Amy's brilliant, but she has a history of unconventional hires that don't work out. You're not the first person she's brought in from the cold, and you won't be the last. Thanks for the warning, Charles said evenly. Just trying to help. Michael's smile didn't reach his eyes. This world eats people like you alive. And when it does, I'll be the one cleaning up the mess. Charles watched him walk away, then pulled out his phone and sent a message to Amy. Your CFO is going to be a problem. Her response came instantly, I know. But he's brilliant with numbers. Can you work with him? Charles typed back, I've worked with worse. But watch him. People who smile while they sharpen knives are the dangerous ones. He didn't mention that Michael reminded him of a logistics officer he'd known in Syria, competent, ambitious, and perfectly willing to sabotage his own team if it meant advancing his career. As Charles stepped into his new office, still full of file boxes and outdated equipment, he looked out at the Chicago skyline and felt the familiar weight of command settling onto his shoulders. He'd spent 8 years running from this feeling, this sense of purpose that came with being responsible for other people's survival. But Emma's face flashed in his mind, her princess dress and her crayon drawings and her absolute trust that Daddy could fix anything. And Charles realized with cold certainty that he hadn't just accepted a job. He'd accepted a war he couldn't afford to lose. Across the city, Julian Thorne's phone buzzed with a notification. His head of intelligence had just sent a file marked, Urgent, Burke, Charles M. Julian opened it, started reading, and slowly began to smile. Oh, Amy, he murmured to himself. You've made a fascinating mistake. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he'd been saving for the right moment. Yes, this is Julian Thorne. I need you to reach out to your contacts at the Pentagon. I'm looking for classified operational records on a former JSOC officer named Charles Burke. Whatever you can find, missions, incidents, anything that might be embarrassing if it went public. He hung up and leaned back in his chair, already planning his next move. Amy Burton had just given him the perfect weapon to destroy her. And she didn't even know it yet. Charles was 3 weeks into his new role when his past came for him at 7 in the morning. He was making Emma breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast shaped like stars, when his phone exploded with notifications. Text messages. Emails. Missed calls from numbers he didn't recognize. His personal email showed 47 new messages, all with subject lines that made his blood turn cold. Is this true? Comment on the allegations. Did you really? Emma was humming at the kitchen table, working on her spelling homework, blissfully unaware that her father's carefully constructed world was about to detonate. Charles opened the first email and felt the ground drop out from under him. Someone had leaked his military file, not the sanitized version available to the public, but the classified operational records that were supposed to be locked in a Pentagon vault forever. Mission reports from Yemen. Photos from Syria. Incident summaries from operations that officially never happened. And there, highlighted in yellow, was the nightmare scenario he'd known would eventually surface, Kandahar, 2016, Operation Copper Shield. The article was already live on Chicago Tribune's website, Burton Ventures' new executive, hero or war criminal. The story painted Charles as a monster. It claimed he'd led a strike operation that resulted in civilian casualties. That he'd ignored intelligence suggesting non-combatants were present. That he'd been investigated by his own command and quietly reassigned to avoid scandal. None of it was true. But all of it was plausible enough to destroy him. "Daddy, you okay?" Emma looked up from her spelling words. Charles forced a smile, his hands shaking as he set down his phone. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just work stuff." "Is the Queen mad at you?" The question nearly broke him. "No, baby. She's not mad. But she would be." Amy had hired him to solve her problems, and he'd just become her biggest liability. He got Emma to school, with her new security detail following at a discreet distance, then drove straight to Burton Tower. The lobby was swarming with reporters. They spotted him the moment he walked in. "Mr. Burke. Can you comment on the allegations? Is it true you were under investigation? Does Ms. Burton know about your past? Did you kill civilians in Afghanistan?" Charles pushed through them, his jaw locked, refusing to respond. The security guards helped clear a path to the private elevator, but the damage was done. By the time he reached the executive floor, every phone in the building was ringing. Amy was in her office, surrounded by her leadership team. They all looked up when Charles entered, and the expressions on their faces told him everything he needed to know. "Out," Amy said to her team. "Everyone except Charles." Patricia hesitated. "Amy, we need to discuss crisis management." "Out." They filed out, and David Ramos paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Burke, I told her this would happen. You can't bring someone with classified baggage into a public company and expect it to stay buried." When the door closed, Amy stood and moved to the window, her back to Charles. The silence stretched out like a blade. "Is any of it true?" she asked finally. "No." Charles's voice was rough. Operation Copper Shield was a hostage rescue. We had intelligence that 3 American contractors were being held in a compound outside Kandahar. When we breached, we found the contractors, dead, executed hours before we arrived. The Taliban had booby-trapped the building. When we withdrew, the explosives detonated. The building collapsed. 16 civilians in the adjacent structure were killed. And the investigation was standard protocol for any operation with civilian casualties. I was cleared of wrongdoing. The intelligence was faulty, but the operational decisions were sound. He stepped closer. "But that's not how it reads in the Tribune, is it? They made it sound like I ignored warnings and got people killed." "Because that's what Julian Thorne wanted it to sound like." Amy turned to face him, and Charles saw fury in her eyes, but not directed at him. "He leaked your file. I don't know how he got it, but this has his fingerprints all over it. The timing, the framing, the selective editing of facts to create maximum damage. He wants you to fire me," Charles said. "Of course he does. And my board is demanding exactly that." Amy pulled up her phone, showed him an email chain. "Emergency board meeting in 3 hours. They want you gone before market close, or they're threatening a no-confidence vote on my leadership." Charles felt something inside him go still and cold. "Then fire me." "Excuse me?" "Fire me, Amy. This is what Thorne wants, to force you into a position where defending me costs you everything. Don't give him that satisfaction. Let me go, put out a statement saying you were misled about my background, and move on. I'll disappear. Emma and I will leave Chicago. It's over. Like hell it is." Amy's voice was steel. "You think I'm going to throw you to the wolves because Julian Thorne leaked classified documents that he illegally obtained? You think I'm going to let him win because he's good at character assassination? I think you need to protect your company," Charles said. 600 employees, remember? Their families. Their futures. I'm not worth sacrificing all of that. Amy moved closer, her eyes blazing. You're right. You're not worth it. But the principle is. If I fire you now, I'm admitting that Julian gets to dictate who works for my company. I'm letting him know that all he has to do is leak something embarrassing and I'll fold. And that means he wins not just this battle, but every battle after it. This isn't about principle. This is about survival. Then let me survive on my own terms. Amy's voice softened slightly. Charles, I read the full operational report. All of it, not just the parts Thorne leaked. I know what really happened in Kandahar. I know you tried to abort the mission when you realized the intelligence was bad. I know you carried wounded civilians out of that building yourself. I know you testified before Congress in a closed session and took full responsibility even though the failure was in the intelligence chain, not your command decisions. Charles felt something crack in his chest. How did you? I have resources too. And I used them. She pulled out a folder, set it on her desk. This is the full record. Everything Thorne left out. And this is what I'm presenting to the board in 3 hours. Because I'm not firing you, Charles. I'm defending you. You'll lose the vote. Maybe. But I'll lose it standing next to someone who deserves my loyalty. She met his eyes. You took a risk on me when you signed that contract. Now I'm returning the favor. Charles wanted to argue, to tell her she was making a catastrophic mistake, but the look on her face stopped him. Amy Burton had spent her entire career calculating risks and rewards, measuring every decision against profit margins and market share. But this wasn't a calculation. This was something else. This was personal. What do you need from me? Charles asked. I need you to tell your story to the board. The real story. Not the sanitized version, not the heroic version, but the truth. What happened, why it happened, and what it cost you. Amy's voice was quiet now. They need to see the man I hired, not the monster Julian's trying to create. Charles nodded slowly. And if they still vote you out? Then we go down fighting. Amy extended her hand. Together. Charles took her hand, and for a moment, they just stood there, two people who'd chosen to trust each other in a world that rewarded betrayal. His phone buzzed. A text from Emma's school, security incident. Man tried to approach Emma during recess. Security intervened. Emma is safe. Charles's vision went red. He showed Amy the message. Her expression turned lethal. He went after your daughter. He's trying to make me panic. To make me quit. Charles's voice was deadly calm. He wants me to know that even if I survive the board meeting, Emma isn't safe. Then he's made a mistake. Amy pulled out her own phone, started typing rapidly. Because now this isn't just about business. It's about protecting a 7-year-old girl. And I don't care what rules I have to break to do it. She looked up at Charles. You're going to tell the board your story. I'm going to defend you. And then we're going to destroy Julian Thorne so completely that he never threatens another child again. Charles felt something shift inside him, the last resistance he'd been holding onto, the belief that he could stay detached from this war. Julian had crossed a line. He'd gone after Emma. And that meant Charles Burke was done running. I'll need full access to Thorne's operations, Charles said, his voice taking on the tone of command he'd used in hostile territories. Financial records, known associates, personal life, everything. If we're going to do this, we're doing it right. You'll have it by end of day. Amy's smile was sharp. Welcome back to the war, Charles. The real one. As Charles left her office to prepare for the board meeting, he passed Michael Chen in the hallway. The CFO was smirking. Saw the news, Michael said. Shame about your military record. Always knew there was something off about you. Charles stopped, turned slowly. Michael, let me give you some advice. When the shooting starts, you want to be behind the people who've been under fire before. Not in front of them. Michael's smirk faded. Is that a threat? It's a prediction. Charles walked away, already planning his presentation to the board. Because Julian Thorne had just taught him a valuable lesson, in this world, the only thing more dangerous than a war hero was a war hero with nothing left to lose. And Charles Burke had just been pushed past that line. The board meeting had been a bloodbath. Charles had stood before 12 of the most powerful investors in the Midwest and told them about Kandahar, not the sanitized version, but the truth. The screams. The explosions. The weight of carrying a dead child out of rubble while bullets tore through the air. The nightmares that still woke him at 3 a.m. When he finished, the room was silent. Then 7 board members voted to fire him. 5 voted to keep him. Amy used her CEO tiebreaker vote to keep him employed by exactly 1 vote. Patricia resigned on the spot. 2 junior analysts quit within the hour. The Wall Street Journal ran a story titled, "Burton Ventures Controversial Hire Splits Board." But Charles was still Chief Strategy Officer. Barely. That was 3 days ago. Now, at 2 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, Charles was in Emma's hospital room, watching his daughter sleep while machines beeped their rhythmic reassurance that she was stable. Pneumonia. The doctor said it was walking pneumonia, nothing life-threatening, but Emma's immune system had been compromised by stress. The security incident at school, the changes to her routine, the way her father had been on the phone constantly, it had all added up. Kids absorb stress, the doctor had said. Even when we think we're protecting them. Charles sat in the uncomfortable chair beside Emma's bed, holding her small hand, feeling the weight of every decision he'd made in the past month crushing down on him. He'd taken this job to protect her future, but he was destroying her present. His phone vibrated. A text from Amy, "Michael just called an emergency executive meeting. They're trying to use your absence to push through a vote of no confidence. I'm holding them off but need you here." Charles stared at the message. A meeting that could determine the company's future, his job, everything they'd been fighting for. Against his daughter's bedside. He texted back, "Can't leave. Emma's in the hospital." Amy's response, "What? What happened? Is she okay?" "Pneumonia. She's stable but scared. I can't leave her right now." 3 minutes passed. Then, "I'm coming to you." "Amy, you can't abandon an executive meeting. That's exactly what they want. Watch me." Charles almost smiled despite everything. He set his phone down and turned back to Emma, who was stirring awake. "Daddy?" Her voice was small, frightened. "I'm here, baby." Charles squeezed her hand. "I'm right here. I don't like hospitals." Emma's eyes were glassy with fever and fear. "They smell weird." "I know. But the doctors are making you better, remember? Tomorrow you'll feel much stronger. Will you stay with me? All night?" "All night," Charles promised. "I'm not going anywhere." Emma's eyes drifted shut again, and Charles felt something in his chest crack wide open. What was he doing? He'd spent 8 years building a quiet life where Emma felt safe, stable, loved. And in 1 month, he'd thrown it all away chasing ghosts and fighting other people's wars. The door opened softly. Charles expected a nurse, but instead Amy Burton stepped in, still in her business suit, her heels clicking softly on the linoleum. She looked at Charles, at Emma sleeping in the hospital bed, and her expression shifted into something Charles had never seen before, genuine fear. "Is she okay?" Amy whispered. "She will be. Charles stood, moving away from the bed so they could talk without waking Emma. "What are you doing here?" "The meeting. I cancelled it." Amy set down her purse, her coat. "Told them if they wanted to vote me out, they could do it tomorrow. But I wasn't having that conversation while you were here." "Amy, that's political suicide. You just handed them." "I don't care." Amy moved to Emma's bedside, looking down at the little girl with the princess dress draped over the visitor's chair, at the crayon drawing spread across the bedside table. "She's 7 years old, Charles. And she's sick because of choices we made." "Choices I made," Charles corrected. "You offered me a way out. I'm the one who took the job." "No." Amy's voice was firm. "I pressured you. I told you Emma was already in danger. I made it impossible for you to say no. And now she's here because I needed a strategist more than I needed to protect a child." Charles had spent weeks watching Amy Burton operate, cold, calculating, ruthless when necessary. But the woman standing beside his daughter's hospital bed looked nothing like the Iron Queen. She looked human. Vulnerable. Terrified. "There's a coffee machine down the hall," Charles said quietly. "Want to take a walk?" They ended up in the hospital cafeteria, empty at 2:30 a.m. except for a tired orderly and a vending machine that buzzed like a dying insect. Amy sat across from Charles with terrible coffee in a styrofoam cup, staring at it like it held answers. "I never wanted children," Amy said suddenly. "Everyone always asks, when are you going to settle down? Start a family? Like building a billion-dollar company isn't enough. Like success doesn't count unless you've also successfully reproduced." Charles didn't respond, just let her talk. "But tonight, when you texted that Emma was sick." Amy's voice cracked. "I left that meeting without thinking. I didn't calculate the political cost or weigh the strategic implications. I just knew that little girl was in a hospital and her father shouldn't have to sit there alone. You barely know Emma. I know she likes to draw princesses. I know she's afraid of the dark. I know she thinks her father can fix anything." Amy looked up at Charles, and there were tears in her eyes. "And I know I've put her in danger because I was too focused on winning to see the cost." Charles reached across the table, covered her hand with his. "Emma's illness isn't your fault. Isn't it? The security incident at her school. The stress of your job. The way you've been working 18-hour days trying to save my company. That's all on me, Charles. I did this. Julian Thorne did this," Charles corrected. "He went after a 7-year-old to get to us. That's not your fault, Amy. That's his choice." Amy pulled her hand back, wiped her eyes roughly. "I'm supposed to be better than this. I don't cry. I don't fall apart. I fix problems. Some problems can't be fixed with strategy and money." Charles stood, walked to the vending machine, bought 2 candy bars, the good kind, the ones Emma loved. He set one in front of Amy. "Sometimes you just have to be human." Amy stared at the candy bar like it was a foreign object. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed, a raw, broken sound. "I'm sitting in a hospital at 3 a.m. eating junk food with a man I met 3 weeks ago because his daughter, who I dragged into a corporate war, has pneumonia. This is the least strategic thing I've ever done. How does it feel?" Amy unwrapped the candy bar, took a bite. "Terrible," she admitted. "And also, right. Like maybe this is what I've been missing." They sat in silence for a while, eating chocolate and drinking bad coffee, 2 people who'd built their lives on control learning to sit with the uncertainty of caring about someone else. "I'm pulling you off the account," Amy said finally. Charles's head snapped up. "What?" "Emma needs you. And you need to be there for her. So I'm reassigning your responsibilities, giving you a leave of absence." Absolutely not. Charles's voice was steel. That's exactly what Julian wants. You fire me or I quit, either way he wins. I'm not firing you. I'm protecting your daughter. By letting Thorne win. By proving that all he has to do is apply pressure and we fold. Charles leaned forward. Amy, the only way to protect Emma long-term is to finish this. If we stop now, if we let Thorne think he can manipulate us through her, she'll never be safe. He'll always know she's a pressure point. So what do you suggest? We end it. Fast. Charles's tactical mind was already racing. Thorne made a mistake when he went after Emma. He showed us what he's willing to do, which means he's desperate. Desperate people make mistakes. And I'm very good at exploiting mistakes. Amy studied him. You have a plan. I've had a plan for 2 weeks. I was just waiting for the right moment to deploy it. Charles pulled out his phone, showed her a document he'd been working on since the security incident. But it requires us to do something unethical. Possibly illegal. Definitely the kind of thing that could destroy us both if it goes wrong. Amy read the document, her eyes widening. Charles, this is nuclear, he finished. I know. But it's also the only way to make sure Thorne never comes after Emma again. He won't just lose, he'll be too destroyed to ever threaten anyone again. And if it backfires? Then we both go to prison, Burton Ventures collapses, and Emma grows up visiting her father through bulletproof glass. Charles met her eyes. But if it works, this war ends in 72 hours. Amy was quiet for a long time, weighing the impossible choice. Finally, she said, what do you need from me? Everything. Your resources, your connections, and your willingness to become someone you've never been before. Which is ruthless, Charles said. Not Iron Queen ruthless. Actually ruthless. The kind of ruthless that ends careers and destroys empires. Amy thought of Emma sleeping upstairs, of the security detail outside her room, of the little girl's fear when she asked if her daddy would stay all night. She thought of every choice that had led them to this moment. Then she stood up. 72 hours. Let's end this. As they walked back to Emma's room, Charles's phone buzzed with a news alert. Burton Ventures stock down 15% after CEO abandons emergency meeting. Julian Thorne was winning. The board was in revolt. The company was bleeding value. But Charles Burke was done playing defense. The war was about to change. Julian Thorne's mistake was thinking Charles Burke had gone soft. It was Friday morning, 56 hours since Emma's hospital admission, and Charles sat in Amy's office with a laptop, 3 burner phones, and a plan that would either save Burton Ventures or destroy them all. Last chance to back out, Charles said. Amy didn't hesitate. Execute. Charles made the first call. Marcus. It's Burke. I need that information we discussed. Everything you found on Thorne's offshore accounts. Marcus Chen, Amy's head of security, not the traitorous CFO Michael, had been digging for 2 weeks. What he'd found was stunning. Julian Thorne, the man who'd built his reputation on aggressive but legal acquisition tactics, had been systematically engaging in securities fraud, insider trading, and market manipulation for years. But they couldn't prove it. Not legally. Every transaction was carefully structured through shell companies, international proxies, and legal loopholes that would take years to untangle in court. So Charles wasn't planning to go through the courts. Second call, Charles said, dialing a number he'd sworn never to use again. A voice answered on the first ring. Burke? That really you? Hey, Ramos. Not David Ramos the lawyer, this was Santiago Ramos, Charles's former commanding officer from JSOC. I need a favor. After 8 years of silence. This must be good. It's complicated. And possibly illegal. Santiago laughed. Now I'm definitely interested. What do you need? I need you to not ask questions about a financial transaction you're about to see hit your retirement account. It's going to look like insider trading proceeds. It's not. But I need you to report it to the SEC as suspicious activity. Silence. Then, Burke, what the hell are you into? I'm protecting my daughter from someone who thinks he can threaten children without consequences. Charles's voice was cold. I need your trust, Santiago. One more time. Another long pause. You know I'd follow you into hell, Burke. But this better not actually be illegal. It's not. I promise. Charles hung up and looked at Amy. Phase 1 initiated. Thorne's going to receive a transfer that looks like it came from his own offshore account, but it didn't. It's clean money from an anonymous donor that's been designed to look dirty. Who's the donor? Amy asked. Me. My entire life savings. $60,000. Everything I've saved since leaving the military. Charles pulled up a screen showing the transaction path. It's being routed through the same banks Thorne uses for his actual illegal transactions. When Santiago reports it, the SEC will start digging. They'll find the real crimes underneath. Amy stared at him. You're using yourself as bait. I'm using my money as a tracer round. Charles started typing rapidly. But that's just distraction. The real attack starts now. He pulled up a video file, security footage from 3 years ago showing Julian Thorne in a parking garage, meeting with a known corporate spy named Victor Lennox. They were exchanging documents. This footage shows Thorne buying stolen IP from TechVision Industries, the company from your competitor's story, Charles explained. It's how he knew which companies to target. He's been buying corporate intelligence for years. Where did you get this? Amy breathed. From someone who used to work for Thorne and finally grew a conscience. Charles uploaded the file to a secure server. In 30 seconds, this video goes to the Wall Street Journal, the SEC, and every major investor in Thorne Capital. And that's when things get interesting. Interesting how? Because Julian's going to panic. Charles pulled up another screen showing Thorne Capital's real-time stock activity. And when billionaires panic, they make mistakes. Like trying to liquidate assets to hide evidence. Or pulling money out of accounts that are under investigation. Or contacting co-conspirators to coordinate stories. Amy was beginning to understand. And you'll be listening. Oh, I've been listening for 2 weeks. Charles opened a folder full of recorded phone calls, emails, text messages. Thorne's operational security is actually quite good. But it's not military grade. And I am. Amy looked at the evidence, months of surveillance, carefully documented crimes, patterns of behavior that would take prosecutors years to unravel. Charles had done it in 2 weeks. How is this legal? Amy asked. It's not, Charles admitted. About 60% of this would be inadmissible in court. But I don't need it to be admissible. I just need it to be true. Because I'm not prosecuting Julian Thorne. I'm destroying his reputation so completely that no investor will ever trust him again. That's character assassination. That's war. Charles met her eyes. He went after Emma, Amy. He terrorized a 7-year-old girl to get to me. So yes, I'm going nuclear. And I'm not apologizing for it. Amy was quiet for a moment. Then she pulled out her own phone. Then let me help. I have contacts at every major financial publication. If we're going to burn him down, let's make sure the whole world watches. For the next 3 hours, they worked in synchronized precision. Charles feeding intelligence, Amy orchestrating the media campaign. By 2 p.m., the Wall Street Journal had published its exposé. By 3 p.m., the SEC had announced an investigation into Thorn Capital. By 4 p.m., 3 major investors had pulled their funding. And by 5 p.m., Julian Thorn's entire empire was on fire. Charles's phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. You, Julian's voice was pure venom. This was you. Hello, Julian. Charles put the call on speaker so Amy could hear. How's your Friday going? You think you've won? You think I don't know this is a setup? Setup implies false evidence. Everything that's hitting the news is true. You've been running illegal operations for years. I just helped expose them. You're dead, Burke. You and that brat of yours. The temperature in the room dropped to absolute zero. Say that again, Charles said quietly. Julian seemed to realize his mistake, but it was too late. His voice was being recorded. His threat against a child was now documented. You just threatened my daughter on a recorded line, Charles said, his voice deadly calm. And that call is currently being live-streamed to the FBI's Cybercrime Division. Special Agent Rodriguez says hello, by the way. She's very interested in talking to you about terroristic threats against minors. Silence. Here's what happens next, Julian. Charles stood, walked to the window overlooking the city. You're going to resign from Thorn Capital. You're going to accept the SEC investigation and cooperate fully. You're going to liquidate your assets to pay restitution to every company you've defrauded. And you're going to do it all publicly, with an apology and an admission of guilt. Or what? Or I release the other files. Charles pulled up a different folder, this one marked personal. The one showing your cocaine habit. Your affair with your business partner's wife. The offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands you used to hide assets from your divorce. The bribes to foreign officials. Should I continue? That's blackmail. That's justice. Charles's voice was ice. You went after my daughter, Julian. You terrorized a 7-year-old girl. So yes, I'm blackmailing you. I'm destroying you. And I'm going to sleep perfectly well tonight knowing that you'll never threaten another child again. You're insane. I'm a father. Charles disconnected the call. Amy was staring at him with an expression between awe and fear. Charles, that was necessary. Charles started shutting down his equipment. Julian Thorn is done. By Monday, Thorn Capital will be in receivership. The SEC will have enough evidence to prosecute him for a decade. And Burton Ventures will be safe. At what cost? Amy asked quietly. Charles paused. What do you mean? You just burned every ethical bridge to protect us. You used illegal surveillance, blackmail, and intimidation. You became the thing you were trying to stop. No. Charles turned to face her. I became what was necessary to protect my daughter. Julian crossed a line when he went after Emma. And I made sure he understood there are some lines you don't cross. Amy wanted to argue, to tell him that there had to be another way. But she looked at the evidence scattered across her desk, the proof of Julian's crimes, the documented threats, the pattern of abuse that had destroyed dozens of companies, and she realized Charles was right. Sometimes the only way to stop a monster was to become something more terrifying. What happens now? Amy asked. Now. Charles smiled, a cold, tactical smile. Now we watch him fall. By Monday morning, Julian Thorn had resigned in disgrace. Thorn Capital was under federal investigation. 3 of his executives had been arrested. And Burton Ventures stock had recovered 15%. Charles Burke had won the war. But as he sat in Emma's hospital room that night, watching his daughter sleep peacefully for the first time in weeks, he wondered if Amy had been right to question the cost. He'd saved his daughter. He'd protected Amy's company. He'd stopped a predator. But he'd also become someone Emma wouldn't recognize. Someone who used blackmail and intimidation and illegal surveillance without hesitation. Someone who'd remembered what it was like to wage war. And he wasn't sure he could stop. The Burton Ventures boardroom had never been this quiet. It was Wednesday morning, 5 days since Julian Thorne's empire had collapsed, and Charles stood before the same board that had nearly fired him a month ago. But this time, he wasn't defending his military record. He was answering for what he'd done to Julian Thorne. Illegal surveillance, board member Catherine Walsh read from a legal memo. Possible securities fraud. Extortion. Blackmail. Mr. Burke, you've exposed this company to lawsuits that could bankrupt us. Julian Thorne is in federal custody, Charles said calmly. He's facing 40 years in prison for crimes he actually committed. I simply accelerated the investigation. By breaking the law yourself, Michael Chen, the CFO who'd been waiting for Charles to fail, said with barely concealed satisfaction. You used company resources to conduct illegal surveillance. You threatened a U.S. citizen. And you did it all without board approval. I did it to protect a 7-year-old girl, Charles countered. Thorne made terroristic threats against my daughter. I responded with the tools at my disposal. Vigilante justice isn't justice, Catherine said. It's chaos. And this board cannot endorse. The boardroom doors opened. Amy Burton strode in, followed by someone Charles hadn't seen in 8 years, Santiago Ramos, his former commanding officer, now in a civilian suit but still carrying himself like military brass. Sorry, we're late, Amy said, taking her seat. We had a visitor from the Justice Department. That got everyone's attention. Santiago stepped forward and introduced himself. I'm here as a federal witness, not as Mr. Burke's friend. The Department of Justice has reviewed the evidence gathered against Julian Thorne, including the methods used to obtain it. While some of Mr. Burke's tactics were unorthodox, everything that led to criminal charges was obtained through legal channels. That's impossible, Michael said. We've seen the surveillance transcripts. You've seen transcripts of conversations where at least one party consented to recording, Santiago interrupted. Mr. Burke was very careful to ensure that every piece of evidence used by prosecutors was legally obtained. The rest? He shrugged. Let's call it strategic intelligence gathering. Charles felt something ease in his chest. Santiago had covered for him. His old commanding officer had reviewed the evidence and found a way to make it legally defensible. Julian Thorne isn't being prosecuted because of illegal surveillance, Santiago continued. He's being prosecuted because Charles Burke identified a pattern of criminal activity and reported it through proper channels. The SEC's investigation was triggered by suspicious financial transactions that Mr. Burke flagged. Everything else was discovered through the government's own investigation. Catherine frowned. But the recordings are inadmissible in court and won't be used in prosecution, Santiago confirmed. Mr. Burke gathered intelligence, which is not illegal for a private citizen investigating threats against his family. He then provided leads to law enforcement, who conducted their own legal investigation. The system worked exactly as designed. Michael wasn't backing down. That's a very convenient interpretation. What about the blackmail? Burke threatened Thorne directly. Julian Thorne threatened a minor, Amy said coldly. On a recorded line. That threat is currently being used to add charges to his indictment. Mr. Burke's response was measured and focused on protecting his daughter. If you have a problem with a father defending his child from documented threats, Michael, I suggest you examine your priorities. The room fell silent. Charles watched the board members exchange glances, saw the calculation happening behind their eyes. Julian Thorne was finished, that was indisputable. And Burton Ventures had survived. The question was whether they were willing to accept the methods used to achieve that survival. "I have a question for Mr. Burke," said James Morrison, the oldest board member and the one Charles respected most. "The same question I asked when you joined us, knowing what you know now, about the cost to your daughter, to your peace of mind, to your principles, would you make the same choice again?" Charles thought of Emma in her hospital bed. He thought of the security detail that still followed her to school. He thought of the nightmares that had returned since he'd stepped back into the world of tactical operations. "No," he said honestly. "I wouldn't." The board seemed surprised by his answer. "If I could go back to that coffee shop," Charles continued, "I would still pay for Ms. Burton's latte. I would still walk away without expecting anything in return. But I wouldn't have taken this job. Not because I'm not good at it, I am. Not because the work wasn't important, it was. But because the cost to my daughter, to the life I'd built for us, was too high." He looked at Amy, saw something like pain flash across her face. "I came here to protect Emma's future," Charles said. "But I nearly destroyed her present in the process. I became someone I'd spent 8 years trying not to be. And while I don't regret stopping Julian Thorne, I regret what I had to become to do it." "So you're resigning," Catherine said. "I'm finishing what I started," Charles corrected. "Burton Ventures is stable now. The immediate threat is neutralized. But there are still vulnerabilities in your operational structure, gaps in your security, patterns that hostile actors could exploit. I'll spend the next 2 weeks documenting everything I've learned, training your staff on threat assessment, and ensuring that when I leave, you're prepared for the next Julian Thorne." "And then?" James asked. "Then I go back to being Emma's dad. I help with her homework, I make her breakfast, I teach her to ride a bike without training wheels. I disappear back into the life where I belong." Charles's voice was firm. "Because my daughter deserves a father who's present, not a strategist who's always at war." Amy stood suddenly. "Charles and I need the room." "Amy, we're in the middle of," Michael started. "Now." Amy's voice left no room for argument. The board filed out, some looking relieved, others frustrated. When the door closed, Amy turned to Charles with fury in her eyes. "You're quitting." "I'm keeping my promise." 6 months, remember? It's been 2. I'll give you 4 more weeks to transition, but then you disappear." Amy's voice cracked. "You go back to being invisible, and I go back to running this company alone, and we pretend the past 2 months didn't happen. That was always the deal, Amy. The deal was made before I watched you sit in a hospital room holding your daughter's hand while she slept." Amy's composure shattered. "Before I saw you sacrifice your savings to protect my company. Before you became the first person in 10 years who chose my well-being over their own advancement." Charles felt something shift in the air between them. "Amy. I'm in love with you," Amy said, the words tumbling out like a confession. "I don't know when it happened. Maybe when you paid for my coffee without asking for anything in return. Maybe when you analyzed my company's problems without being asked. Maybe when you sat across from me in that hospital cafeteria and made me remember what it felt like to be human. But I'm in love with you, Charles Burke. And watching you prepare to walk away is breaking something inside me I didn't know could still break." The silence that followed was deafening. "You can't love me," Charles said finally. "You barely know me. I know you're the only person who's ever looked at my empire and chosen to walk away from it. I know you're a man who spent 8 years becoming invisible to protect his daughter. I know you're brilliant, damaged, kind, and terrifying in equal measure. And I know that for the first time in my adult life, I don't want to be alone anymore." Charles closed his eyes. "I have a daughter. I know. She comes first. Always. No matter what." I know that too. Amy stepped closer. Charles, I'm not asking you to choose between me and Emma. I'm asking if there's room in your life for both of us. For a family that's bigger than just the two of you. You don't want children, Charles said. You told me that. I said I never wanted children, Amy corrected. Past tense. But Emma already exists. And she's extraordinary. And if letting you walk away means I never get to see her draw another princess or watch her tell you about her day, then I don't want that future. Charles opened his eyes, looked at Amy Burton, the Iron Queen who'd built an empire on ruthless calculation, standing in front of him with tears on her face, asking for something she'd never asked for before, permission to be vulnerable. Emma has to want this too, Charles said carefully. I won't bring someone into her life unless she's ready. Then let's ask her. Amy pulled out her phone. Emma's being discharged this afternoon, right? What if we pick her up together? The three of us could have dinner, and we could just see what happens. Amy, this is insane. We've known each other for 2 months. I built $1 billion company in 5 years. I think I can figure out if I want to be with someone in 2 months. Amy's voice was fierce. Unless you're telling me you don't feel anything. That watching me cancel meetings to sit with you in a hospital, or seeing me defend you to the board, or having me tell you I love you, that none of that matters. Charles wanted to lie. Wanted to tell her that he'd kept his heart locked away, that he was still the invisible maintenance worker who didn't let people in. But he couldn't. I'm terrified, he admitted. Emma lost her mother. If I bring you into her life and this doesn't work, I'm not the only one who gets hurt. She loses someone again. Then we don't let it not work. Amy took his hand. Charles, I'm not good at relationships. I'm controlling and obsessive and I work too much. But I'm very good at commitment. When I decide something matters, I don't give up on it. And you matter. Emma matters. This, she gestured between them, matters. Charles thought of Emma asking if Amy was a queen. He thought of the way Amy had dropped everything to come to the hospital. He thought of the future he'd been planning, going back to maintenance work, raising Emma alone, staying invisible forever. And he thought of the alternative, a future where Emma had 2 people who loved her. Where Charles didn't have to carry everything alone. Where the Iron Queen learned to be human and the Invisible Man learned to be seen. One dinner, Charles said. We pick up Emma together, we go somewhere she likes, and we see how she reacts to spending time with you. If she's uncomfortable, if she's not ready. Then we slow down, Amy agreed. We go at Emma's pace. Not yours, not mine. Hers. Charles nodded slowly. Then he pulled Amy into his arms, and she came without hesitation, her face pressed against his chest, her carefully constructed armor finally cracking. I don't know how to do this, Charles whispered. How to be a father and a partner and someone worth loving. Neither do I, Amy admitted. But maybe we can figure it out together. They stood there for a long moment, 2 people who'd spent their lives running from connection finally standing still long enough to reach for it. When they pulled apart, Amy wiped her eyes and straightened her suit. I need to go back out there and finish the board meeting. Are you staying? No. Charles smiled slightly. I'm going to go pick up my daughter from the hospital. And then I'm going to ask her if she wants to have dinner with a queen. Amy laughed, real, unguarded. She's going to love that. As Charles left the boardroom, he passed Michael Chen in the hallway. The CFO was smirking again. Enjoy it while it lasts, Burke. Amy Burton gets bored easily. You'll be back to fixing toilets in 6 months. Charles stopped, looked at Michael with the calm certainty of someone who'd survived much worse than corporate politics. Michael, if Amy and I don't work out, it won't be because she got bored. It'll be because one of us wasn't brave enough. But I've stared down enemy combatants in war zones. I think I can handle loving a brilliant woman. He walked away, leaving Michael's smirk faltering. Because Charles Burke had finally learned something important, the bravest thing a person could do wasn't surviving war. It was choosing to love someone despite knowing it could end in loss. And for the first time in 8 years, Charles was ready to be that brave. 3 months later, Charles Burke stood at a coffee shop counter, the same one where this story began, with his daughter on one side and Amy Burton on the other. 3 Americanos, Emma announced to the barista with the confidence of a 9-year-old who'd been practicing. 1 with 4 shots for the Queen, 1 regular for Daddy, and 1 with lots of cream and sugar for me. The barista, Jenna, still working the Monday morning shift, smiled. Coming right up, Emma. Charles pulled out his wallet, but Amy beat him to it, her black card already on the counter. My treat today. You sure that card works now? Charles teased. Amy laughed. Turns out it was just an expired card. My assistant forgot to activate the new one. The great cosmic joke, my entire life changed because of bureaucratic oversight. Best oversight in history, Charles murmured, and Amy squeezed his hand. They took their coffees to a table by the window, the same window Charles had walked past every day for 6 years without being seen. Now, he sat with his daughter coloring on napkins and Amy reviewing documents on her tablet, and he felt more visible than he'd ever been. Emma looked up from her drawing. Amy, can you come to my school thing on Friday? We're doing presentations about our families. Amy's hand froze over her tablet. She looked at Charles, uncertain. What do you want to present about? Charles asked Emma carefully. About how families can be different. Emma said it like it was obvious. Like how I have Daddy, and now I have Amy, and we all live together, but Amy goes to the office a lot, and that's okay because when she comes home she always asks about my day. Charles felt his throat tighten. They'd been living together for 6 weeks. Amy had sold her penthouse and moved into a bigger house in Charles's neighborhood, one with a yard for Emma and a home office for both adults. It had been Emma's idea, proposed one night over pizza when she'd asked Amy, "Why do you leave every night? Don't you want to stay for breakfast?" Amy had looked at Charles, and Charles had looked at Emma, and somehow his 7-year-old daughter had understood what the adults were still figuring out, that family wasn't about bloodlines or tradition. It was about people who chose to show up for each other. I would love to come to your presentation, Amy said, her voice thick with emotion. What do you need me to bring? Just you, Emma said simply, then returned to her drawing. Amy's eyes met Charles's across the table, and he saw everything she was feeling reflected back, gratitude, terror, wonder, and something that looked like coming home. His phone buzzed. A text from Burton Ventures' new CFO. They'd replaced Michael after discovering he'd been feeding information to Julian Thorne in exchange for a promised position at Thorne Capital. The new CFO was asking Charles's advice on a strategic decision. You're still consulting, Amy observed. Part-time, Charles confirmed. 3 days a week, remote work only. It keeps me sharp but doesn't consume me. And the other 4 days? Charles gestured to Emma. I'm a full-time dad. School drop-offs, homework help, princess tea parties. The important stuff. You know the board would hire you back in a heartbeat, Amy said. Full executive position, better salary. No. Charles's answer was immediate. I meant what I said, Amy. Emma comes first. Always. I'll consult, I'll advise, but I won't go back to being the person who worked 18-hour days and came home too exhausted to read bedtime stories. Amy nodded, understanding. She'd made similar changes in her own life, leaving the office by 6 p.m. most days, blocking out weekends for family time, delegating responsibilities she'd once insisted on controlling personally. The Iron Queen was learning to be human, one small compromise at a time. Speaking of which, Amy said, I was thinking we could take a vacation next month. Just the three of us. Emma's spring break lines up with a week I could take off, and I heard about this ranch in Montana where they teach kids to ride horses. Yes. Emma practically shouted. Can we, Daddy? Please. Charles laughed. I suppose we could. Though I should warn you, Amy, family vacations with a 7-year-old are very different from business trips. I'm counting on it, Amy said softly. They finished their coffees as the morning crowd filtered in, professionals grabbing lattes before heading to offices, tourists consulting maps, elderly couples sharing pastries. The same rhythm that had been playing when Charles had paid for Amy's coffee 3 months ago. But everything had changed. Burton Ventures was thriving. With Julian Thorne's predatory tactics exposed, several companies he'd targeted had actually approached Amy about acquisitions, trusting her where they'd feared Thorne. The firm had closed 2 major deals in the past month. Charles had become something of a legend in the business community, the maintenance worker who'd taken down a billionaire and saved a company. He'd declined every interview request, every speaking opportunity, every attempt to turn him into a public figure. He'd chosen invisibility once, and while he was no longer hiding, he had no interest in fame. Emma had adjusted remarkably well to their new family structure. She still had nightmares sometimes, still worried about losing people she loved. But her therapist said she was processing her trauma in healthy ways, and having Amy as a stable presence had actually helped her trust that good things could last. I need to tell you something, Amy said suddenly. I got an offer yesterday. A rival firm wants to buy Burton Ventures. They're offering $3 billion. Charles went still. What did you say? I told them I'd think about it. Amy's voice was careful. Charles, that's life-changing money. I could retire tomorrow. I could spend every day with Emma, with you. I could stop being the CEO who's always distracted by the next deal and just be present. But? Charles heard the hesitation. But I've spent 15 years building Burton Ventures. It's my legacy. And I'm not sure I'm ready to walk away, even for $3 billion. Amy looked at Emma, who was showing her drawing to Jenna the barista. I'm not sure who I am if I'm not building something. Charles reached across the table, covered her hand with his. Then don't sell. Amy, I didn't fall in love with you because you could afford to stop working. I fell in love with you because you're brilliant and driven and you change the world through what you build. If you sold the company because you think that's what I want, you'd be miserable within 6 months. But Emma needs a mother figure who's fulfilled and passionate about her life, Charles interrupted. Not someone who gave up her purpose to be home for breakfast. We're making this work, Amy. The 3 of us. You don't have to sacrifice your empire to be part of our family. Amy's eyes filled with tears. How are you so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just a guy who spent 8 years trying to be someone I'm not. I won't let you make the same mistake. Charles smiled. Keep your company. Build your empire. Just come home to us when you're done conquering the world. I love you, Amy whispered. I love you too, Charles said. Even though you're terrible at making breakfast and you reorganize my workshop without asking and you still think you can solve parenting challenges with spreadsheets. Amy laughed through her tears. You're terrible at delegating and you refuse to use my driver and you insist on doing laundry even though we could hire someone. Daddy, Amy, come look. Emma called from the counter. Jenna says she remembers when you first met. They joined Emma at the counter, where Jenna was grinning. I'll never forget it. This lady's card got declined, and this guy swooped in like a hero. I thought it was the sweetest thing I'd ever seen. It was just coffee, Charles said. It was never just coffee, Amy corrected. She looked at Charles, at Emma, at the coffee shop where a random act of kindness had rewritten 3 lives. It was the beginning of everything. As they walked out into the Chicago morning, Charles holding Emma's hand, Amy's arm linked through his, Charles thought about the man he'd been 6 months ago. Invisible. Isolated. Hiding from his own brilliance because he was terrified of what it might cost. But standing here with his daughter and the woman he loved, Charles realized he hadn't lost anything by stepping back into the light. He'd gained a family. A purpose. A future that didn't require him to choose between being present and being useful. Emma skipped ahead, then turned back to look at them. "Daddy, are we still a regular family even though Amy's a queen?" Charles and Amy exchanged glances. Then Charles crouched down to Emma's level. "Sweetheart, we're not a regular family. We're better. We're a family that chose each other. And that's the best kind there is." Emma thought about that, then nodded seriously. "Okay. But Amy's still a queen, right?" "Always," Amy confirmed, ruffling Emma's hair. "A queen who's very lucky to be part of your family." They walked back to Charles's truck, the same beat-up vehicle he'd driven for 6 years, which Amy kept threatening to replace and Charles kept refusing to surrender. As they drove through the city toward home, Charles caught Amy's eye in the rearview mirror. She was smiling. Not the calculated smile of the Iron Queen, but something real and unguarded and full of hope. And Charles realized that he'd been wrong about something fundamental. He'd thought his story ended when he left military service, that choosing invisibility meant choosing safety over purpose. But the truth was simpler, his story had been waiting for the right people to help him write the next chapter. A billionaire who needed to remember her humanity. A daughter who needed to know she was enough. And a man who needed to learn that being seen wasn't the same as being vulnerable, sometimes it was just being loved. They pulled up to the house, their house now, with Emma's bicycle in the yard and Amy's car in the driveway and a mailbox that read, "Burke Burton," in letters Emma had painted herself. "Home," Emma announced, already unbuckling her seatbelt. "Home," Amy echoed, reaching for Charles's hand. And Charles Burke, the invisible man who'd paid for a stranger's coffee and accidentally saved his own life in the process, smiled and said the truest thing he'd ever known. "Home."